All right, hello everyone. Let me see if I can get these lights a little better. Alexa, center light on. Alexa, lights off. Alexa, all lights off. Alexa, center light on. All right, hopefully that's a little bit more visible. Hi everyone, Mike Mooney 201 here. First live stream for my airplane flying channel. Usually we just fly out for a $100 hamburger and get to catch up in person. But between the whole pandemic and then lots and lots of snow up in the Northeast, just been missing out on those awesome flights. So think of this as one of our Mooney fly-ins where we can fly in and have good conversation, just everything minus the flying and minus the hamburger. So here we are just having a chat online. So I got some things I'll ramble about, some stories and insights to share. But if you have any questions or topics you'd like me to cover, feel free to throw them in the comments. Now, I see that Eve's joined. Hi, Eves. How's it going? Eves is my Canadian counterpart. We flew into Oshkosh in formation. I was tight on his butt, and he was all over the place, bouncing up, bouncing down, and he couldn't shake me off. So I think he was trying to get rid of me at some of those moments, but that didn't work. And you can see that video on my channel later. Another thing that Eves introduced me to was the Casey fly-in in Canada. That was just absolutely incredible. Camping out in the wilderness at an abandoned airport in the deep Canadian wilderness. We flew in formation out to that in our two Mooneys, and that was a wonderful experience as well. So good to see you join. Neil Cohen says, is a participant's camera linked to this chat? No, I don't think so. This is still a YouTube video, so you guys can see me, but you can leave your comments in the chat. It's not really a Zoom conference where we'd be having a mutual conference. It's more of just you guys get to watch me, but I'm going to keep an eye on the comments and get back to you guys. Anthony Caruso's here. Anthony is also known as the ambassador of Mooney Space. I think he's posted so many posts to Mooney Space that the servers might be out of storage space. So, oh, and speaking of which, Anthony was right seat for me when we went to Oshkosh in formation with Eve. So this is lots and lots of people that I know in person, and hopefully some people from around the country that maybe I don't know. Speedbreak Aviation says hello from Austin. Haven't flown to Austin specifically, but I was in nearby San Marcos, really close by, and that was an epic flight flying nonstop from Linden to San Marcos, nonstop in the Mooney M20J. It was supposed to take 10 hours. It actually took 11 due to headwinds, but that was a flight of a lifetime. And I didn't get a chance to visit Austin. I went to San Antonio instead during my brief stay there. And he says that he did his primary training at San Marcos. So, small world. It's exciting to get to visit all these different places, and the Mooney is an incredible platform for getting around. So for those of you that maybe don't know me very much, I'd like to introduce myself and share a little bit about my background. My name is Mike, Mooney 201er, also known as the Parrot Wizard on YouTube. You can see my Parrot videos there. If you're interested in parrots or parrot supplies, you can check those out at parrotwizard.com. But today I'm here to talk about my love of Moonies and aviation and share that with you. If we have questions or topics, I'll address those throughout the chat. But in the meantime, I just have some other topics to share. My interest in aviation started from early childhood. I always admired airplanes and birds and everything that flies. I've always wanted to be involved in flight. And even when I was like 4 years old, I was making airplanes out of Legos. I had Legos that were meant to be a ship or to be a house or something different, and I would find a way to recombine them and make my own imaginary airplanes. Always admired things that fly. When I was 18, I had the opportunity to learn to fly gliders. So I actually started by getting a private pilot certificate in glider. Flew gliders for a few years, and I think that definitely helped contribute to making me a better airman. Learning to manage energy, to understand and appreciate angle of attack, and actually at the time I didn't really understand angle of attack so well, but I focused on pitch flying, flying by pitch, not so much by instrumentation or airspeed, but really flying by pitch. And interestingly, in a glider, because you're usually flying solo and you weigh about the same, pitch and angle of attack correlate pretty directly, pretty good direct correlation. Whereas in an airplane, first of all, the fuel burns down. So even if you fly solo a lot, your weight is going to change, and as the weight changes, the pitch to angle of attack changes. Pitch to angle of attack changes as well with altitude and density altitude, and of course when you take passengers. So in airplane, it's a loose correlation, but in glider, it's a pretty direct correlation. So I really got to appreciate learning to fly by pitch and angle of attack by flying gliders. Got my commercial certificate in glider and did a few years giving rides in gliders. Started my private pilot training in Andover and started by learning to fly a J3 Cub. That was a lot of fun. Kind of also more of that stick and rudder, just down to the nitty gritty flying basics. Again, not the precision cross country instrument flying that I'm used to doing now in the Mooney, but having that background of gliders and tailwheel really helped me be a better hands on pilot. And I definitely recommend that too. I think in the beginning, early flying is really about hands on. It's about learning to have great control and feel of the airplane. And then as you get into more advanced flying, it turns more into cockpit management, using your navigation tools, using your GPS and your autopilot and managing the situation. So when you're going long cross country, it's less about the hands on stick and rudder and more about judgment and management of the flight, but having those good stick and rudder skills applied every takeoff and landing, and of course in any kind of an emergency. So starting out with a good strong basis in stick and rudder skills is just a great idea. So moving on from the J3 Cub, I started flying a bit in a Skyhawk. Then at the airport I flew gliders from at Blairstown, they got a Cessna 152, and I jumped in and soloed that pretty quick and did most of my training in that. And that was like flying a golf cart or a small little car. That was so easy compared to the Cub or even the Skyhawk. Got my private pilot certificate in the 152, but pretty soon moved up to a 172 to be able to take passengers. Rented that for a little while. Changed over to Braden and learned to fly the Piper Arrow there. It was the Arrow 1 with the Hershey bar wing, and that was a bit different, but it was exciting to get a complex endorsement and learn to get more involved in cross country. And soon after, I bought my Mooney M20J. At that point, I'd been flying for about 6 years already because I started in 2005 in gliders. I forget when I got my private pilot in airplane. That was kind of not that significant of a point in my life. Learning to start to fly gliders was a significant point. Getting my Mooney was a significant point. Somewhere in between, I got my private pilot airplane. But because I was already private pilot and glider, it just wasn't that big of a deal. So sometimes people ask me, like, were you really nervous when you soloed an airplane? And honestly, it wasn't that big of a deal because I was already private pilot airplane. Private pilot glider. I was used to making my own decisions, my own judgment. So as a result, kind of moving on to airplane was just a continuation of what I was already doing. But in 2011, 10 years ago, I bought my Mooney M20J, and that kind of set off a long course of flying. So I'll come back to that, but let me take a quick look at the comments, see if we had any questions, and if not, I'll share some more of that Mooney flying adventure here in a moment. So, Eve's asked, do you have dreams about flapping your hands and starting to fly? Not really, but I do love having my parrots fly at home. It's my way of dreaming about flight even when I'm not flying. Greetings from Spokane, Washington. I'm stationed at Fairchild Air Force Base. My uncle had a M20C. I'm going to take lessons after I retire. My goal is to buy a Mooney someday. Wonderful, wonderful goals. Cherokee 180 owner here. What do you do for a living, may I ask? First of all, I flew Piper Arrow and what do they call them? Piper Cadet, I think. It was like a 160 horsepower Warrior. So a lot of fun. That was my introduction to low wing. And for a living, I'm known as the Parrot Wizard. I make and sell parrot supplies, teach parrot owners about making good pets out of them. Now, parrots, they're wild animals. They're not, even though they're sold at a pet store, you think of them as a pet, and then you get home with them and you realize they're not a pet. They're almost like having a pigeon at home. They're not really that pet that you thought from watching videos or what you were misled to think at the store. So people have a lot of difficulty with them, and I feel like I have a very good approach and connection with them and really understand them well. And to a large degree, that comes from my flying. I was flying before I got involved in parrots. Flying and airplanes were always my goal, and I was already flying gliders, private pilot at that time, and I was looking to get a pet and wasn't really sure what to get. And my flying interest took me toward in the direction of parrots, and my understanding and appreciation of them as a flying creature and the freedom and just beauty of being able to fly and how they feel in the sky helped me understand that even when they're not flying, they feel that freedom. They feel um, just so free and their own living being, and that helped me understand and appreciate them and how to apply training to them and how to make supplies to encourage them to be their best selves and to improve our relationship with them. So if that's something you're interested in, you can check out my videos and interest in parrots at parrotwizard.com later on. Let me see the chat real quick. I worked at Mooney from 77 until 82. Oh, fantastic. We got Mooney employees here. That's maybe you were involved in building my airplane. Mine's a 78 M20J. And I have a private pilot with 100 hours. Is a M20J okay for me? Thanks for that question, Brander. And I'm going to answer from my perspective. And I know people will disagree with me and people won't like my answer, but it's really genuine. It's really based on my piloting experience and some of the training. And, having been there, I mean, kind of long time ago, not that long ago. And to be honest, I don't think that an M20J or any of the Mooneys for that matter are a good starter airplane or intro airplane or airplane for a beginner. It's a lot of airplane. It's a lot of airplane both in terms of the immediate flying, like in the pattern, going for $100 hamburger. It's a lot of airplane just even in controlling it, remembering to put the gear down, the constant speed prop, managing the engine. But also, it's a lot of airplane when you start doing cross country. Basically, it's so fast that you have a lot more potential to get into trouble. So in terms of stick and rudder, it's a bit of work, but it's also in terms of the airplane management that I was talking about, it can be quite a lot. You're able to go so fast and so far that even on a single tank of gas, you can end up in a different weather system. You take off, clear blue skies, light winds, everything's wonderful. You read the forecast, you think you know what you're doing, you don't really have that. And 3-4 hours later, you're in a completely different weather system and not quite prepared for how much things can change and how quickly they can change. So when you're flying as a slower airplane, a Cherokee, a Skyhawk, something like that, it's almost harder to get far away enough to get into trouble, and things happen slower. You have more time to think. Coming in on approach, things are happening slower, more time, and less complexity. So I really genuinely believe from my experience before, during, and after that it's a great idea to get a Mooney or an M20J, but really when you're ready. And when I was a 100-hour pilot, I thought I was ready for everything. And, later on, I realized maybe not so much, and realizing that I was making mistakes back then. It's really good to get really good at what you're already doing, get good at whatever you're currently flying, get really good at it, really comfortable. Get to a point where you've screwed up in what you're flying and you realize that you thought you knew what you were doing, that you didn't really know what you're doing. Now you know a bit better what you're doing, and you realize that there's still plenty of room to grow and that you're still learning what you're doing. So when you're 2, 3, 400 hours, I mean, I'm not putting a specific number on it, but experience is the culmination, the combination of past things that happened, and certain things only happen at certain amounts of time. Like, for example, I'd say statistically speaking, I've had a vacuum pump failure in my Mooney statistically about every 500 hours. Having over 1,500 hours in my Mooney, that means I've already had it happen 3 times. And I actually have had it happen 3 or 4 times. So, it follows the statistics roughly. And if you fly for, let's say, 1,000 hours, you will have experienced that multiple times. If you only flew for 200 or 300 hours, it may be something you have or probably haven't experienced even once. And in the beginning, you feel like kind of invulnerable because you've never had it happen and it doesn't seem like a big deal. You flew for 200 hours already and never had a vacuum pump failure. You don't take it that maybe as seriously. You feel invulnerable that it just always works. And it just takes a certain amount of time to run into certain situations. And I'm not just talking about equipment failure, I'm talking about even hitting the ground real hard, doing a really crappy landing, and realizing that maybe you shouldn't fly when you're tired, or you shouldn't fly with that kind of weather. I mean, all kinds of things, and it just takes time to discover these things, both about your airplane, about yourself, and flying whatever you're already flying long enough to discover the airplane and discover yourself will make you discover a more advanced airplane like a Mooney much better when you do move up to that. So me personally, I had about 300 hours total time when I moved up to the M20J. About 200 of that was in gliders, about 100, maybe 150 was in airplanes. So I didn't have that much airplane time, but I had a lot of time in gliders and just flying. And in the flying community, I've been flying for 6 years. So even though I didn't have 300 hours of airplane time specifically, all that time hanging out at airports, talking with guys, hearing about situations, that I feel like the most valuable thing, having hundreds of hours in glider coming into into the Mooney, not just the airplane time, was just that it gave me enough time to screw up, to hear other people screw up, to learn from mistakes, and not have that feeling of invulnerability that you do as a beginner. And I think that that is really the thing that helps you graduate and become a better airman, an experienced airman, and be ready for more airplane. Let me make sure I grab some more questions, and I could talk about more about that if there's interest. Um, let's see here. Michael Drake said, "What are you doing on here on Valentine's Day? Go be with your wife and child. Thanks for purchasing advice last year. I'm still on the search for my 201. We've been hanging out all day and probably will be after this as well. But airplanes are my other love and hobby, and feel like sharing some of the love with you guys here as well. But we will be back and enjoying the rest of the day here together soon." Um, let's see. Terry said, "I probably did. I worked as an avionics tech." Oh, cool, fantastic. Those avionics have probably been replaced. Warms my heart to see those old Moonies still flying. Joan said, "Please, moment on power setting, RPM, and fuel burn. Do you ever go lean of peak? Or do you ever go lean of peak?" Yes, I fly almost entirely lean of peak. Rich of peak is pretty much only during takeoff and on short final. Um, in the climb, I usually climb rich of peak for the extra power, but pretty much all of my cruise and descent, probably 95-98% of my cruise time is lean of peak. Um, I, I don't know if I should admit this, but I probably even when I'm formation flying, I'm probably lean of peak for half of those formation flights. When it's like advanced, busy, lots of stuff going on, I'm probably rich of peak, like kind of during those training flights. But even on cross country formation flights, I've been flying them lean of peak. I don't even look at the stuff. I can grab the knobs and I know where to put them to be lean of peak, even blindfolded or with my neck glued sideways looking at the other airplane. So that's the way I've been flying my Mooney almost entirely since I got it. It's not only lower fuel burn, it keeps the temperatures lower, the engine seems happy, the oil comes back cleaner. So I've been quite happy with the lean of peak flying. You do sacrifice a bit of speed and power, but I've found that flying at a lower power setting really helps with the longevity, helps reduce maintenance, and maintenance costs way more than fuel. So even though I'm saving up on fuel, saving on maintenance is a bigger deal. It just seems like there's less wear and tear. Lower RPM, I cruise at a bit lower RPM, and just take it easy. Just take the power back a little bit. Most of my cruise is at 60 and 65% power. That's about 8 to 8.5 gallons an hour when lean of peak. And with 100 gallons of fuel on board and 8 to 8.5 gallons, I can fly for 10 or 11 hours nonstop, no problem. flew 11 hours nonstop to San Marcos and landed with over 10 gallons still in the tanks. I flew nine and a half hours from Denver nonstop back to Linden, 1,400 nautical miles, 9.5 hours, and there was probably like 20 or 30 gallons of fuel still left in the tanks. So Lena Peak flying does help me stretch that range. It definitely mattered flying in the Caribbean. I had 8-hour legs, like going from Belize to San Andreas, and from San Andreas to Aruba. Those are 8-hour legs, and having extra fuel reserve by taking it easy on the fuel definitely helped. And just flying all over the country, having been coast to coast a whole bunch of times, flying Lena Peak and keeping that speed down a little bit definitely helps stretch the range. And I found that by flying slower and avoiding a fuel stop really saves me more time. Like, for example, going down to Florida, on 64-gallon tanks, for example, you got to make a stop in an M20J. With 100 gallons on board and flying Lena Peak and taking it a little easy, 6 or 7 hours nonstop Linden to most parts of Florida, and skip a fuel stop, and I'm there. And flying a little bit faster, like 10, 15 knots faster, can save half an hour, but a fuel stop usually takes more than half an hour anyway by the time you land and get out, get the fuel on board and get back in. You got to spend time in the climb again. So efficient flying is, I think, the specialty of the Mooney M20J in particular. The efficiency even more so than the speed. Let's see here. Try to answer a couple more questions. I watched your flight to Cuba in the Caribbean, and that helped inspire me to fly to Argentina via Cuba in the Caribbean in 2018. Do you have plans for another big trip? Not anything specific at this moment. I've been mostly just flying local in this last year for multiple reasons, actually. Not just because of the pandemic, but also because of the baby came recently, been keeping me real busy. So in some ways, I'm not missing out much because I wouldn't be flying that much this year anyhow. Someday, I really hope to get to Alaska in my airplane, but I'm going to need 2 or 3 weeks, and that's going to be very hard for the foreseeable future to find enough time to get out for that long. Probably next trip is going to be to Florida. My wife and I just want to get out. So when there's an opportunity, I'm really hoping to make it down to Mooney Summit this year in Tampa. So that's definitely a trip that we're going to look forward to and hope to make it out to. Maybe I'll make it out to Oshkosh. Let's see how things play out. And of course, I want to make it out to Casey this year for the flying camping trip in Canada. Let's see here. Any advice on transition training recommendation for a 100-hour Cessna pilot? Now, I'm not sure if you're asking about transitioning to something else or transitioning to a Mooney. I think that with 100 hours in the Cessna, there's still plenty to learn about aviating and about flying that Cessna. So I would totally say take your time and enjoy it and make the most of it. Get a couple hundred more hours. Really get to a point where you're comfortable with that airplane, not only because you've done it and you have it figured out, but where you've also had a chance to make your mistakes, get them out of your system, in a familiar airplane, in an easier airplane. I don't know. When I recently watched a video about Carl from Flying with the Guys, and he confessed to forgetting to put the mags back to both, and he took off on a single mag, and that was a big scare for him. Things like this, whatever screw ups you're going to make, try to get them out of your system now, earlier, in something you're familiar with, something you trained in, something you have more experience in. Don't necessarily rush to transition into a new and too much airplane, and where you still have all of that like novice complications yet to make. Try to make those novice mistakes and those novice scares and difficulties, maybe where you feel too bold and you get into weather you shouldn't fly into, or you go too far and you get fatigued on a flight. All these kind of things. You have still yet to experience so many of the difficulties and challenges of aviation. Doing something you're good at, something you're familiar with, and I think that you will take the transition training and the advanced flying another airplane that you get into much more seriously, and put more into it, having that extra experience in whatever you're familiar with. I know a lot of people say just get the airplane you want, do it early, train in the airplane you're going to have for a long time. And I mean, I agree with that to a large degree, but not too soon. You know, get yourself good at what you're doing. And listen, I'm really happy. I did a lot of glider flying, and I rented Skyhawk, I rented those Cadet Warriors, and I rented an Arrow, and I got to fly a lot of other airplanes before, and I had a diversity of experience in those trainer and flight school airplanes. I think they've made me a better pilot in my Mooney. I've barely been in any airplanes besides my Mooney or friends with Moonies since I've had a Mooney. I've been in more different airplanes before I had my airplane than after. I've flown more variety of airplanes before than after. A lot of that with an instructor and things like that, but I got to experience that. Whereas, kind of once I got my airplane, that's been it. The last 1,500 hours I've flown were in my Mooney. The first couple hundred I flew before that were in probably a dozen different gliders and airplanes. So enjoy that. Enjoy the diversity of flying different things. If your flight school offers different airplanes, if your flight school offers a 152 and a 172, a 182, and a Cherokee, get checked out in each one of those, rent each one, find out what you like and dislike about each plane, enjoy flying different airplanes, because very likely once you get your own airplane, you're going to be kind of just flying that, and diversity of experience will be both fun and memorable for when you move up to whatever you're going to keep in the long term. Christopher says, how comfortable is it to be in a Mooney for long cross countries? Would a 6'2", 210-pound person be comfortable in your 201 for a 4-hour leg? The answer is that the Mooney is probably the only 4-seat airplane that's designed by someone who's tall. Al Mooney was 6 foot something, and he designed the airplane around himself. It's probably the most comfortable airplane for a tall person. And what's different about the seating configuration in a Mooney compared to most of the other airplanes, most airplanes, it's like you're sitting in a chair. You're kind of like sitting in an SUV. You sit with your knees bent and down. There's not a lot of leg room going forward. And most of those airplanes, you sit with your legs tucked down beneath you. And when you're tall, you have taller legs. And when your legs are taller, your knees are going to be standing up higher, and that's uncomfortable. Now in the Mooney M20J, it's kind of the opposite. You're almost practically sitting on the floor. The seat is probably this high off the floor, maybe 12 inches at most, maybe 10 inches. You're almost on the floor. Your legs are stretched out in front of you. And in fact, short people have to get rudder extensions to be able to reach the rudder pedals. So if anything, if there's anyone a Mooney is wrong for, it's for a short and I guess I'll just say fat guy with a big belly. You're not gonna be able to reach the pedals. You got to keep that sucked in. And one of the things I actually found very strange about the Mooney, it took me a couple, like the first 100 hours to get used to compared to Cherokees and Cessnas and other airplanes. You're sitting very close to the panel with the yoke very close. I was just sitting kind of further away with the panel a little further away and the yoke a little further away. The Mooney, you're sitting very close to that, but there's a lot of leg room underneath the panel. Your legs are stretched out. And I have the seat probably about midway when I'm on the pedals. So there's probably one or two clicks closer you can go, and I'm 5'10". But if you're taller, there's probably one or two clicks back than where I'm at that you can be. And I think I've heard of people even drilling extra holes to be even further back. And I can tell you, when I'm on the pedals, there is more leg room in the seat behind me than on an airliner. And if someone's short in the front, you've got a ton of leg room in the back. And if you're very tall, then maybe someone won't be sitting behind you, but that's okay. You know, they'll still fit. I know when I have the seat all the way back in cruise, I just slide all the way back. I can't even reach the rudder pedal. It's not even close. I'm like chilling, relaxing, very comfortable. It's a little strange sitting so low with your legs out, but here's the good news, especially when you bring the seat back in cross country, you have more flexibility and choice. You can have your legs out, or to change your position, you kind of bring your legs in with your knees up high, you know, with your legs close and the knees high. Sometimes, especially if I'm flying by myself, but even with my wife or something, I man spread across the second seat and get a stretch that way too. So sometimes my legs are out, sometimes they're kind of in with the knees up, and sometimes just really wide. And having those changes helps with circulation, helps that be more comfortable. And it's definitely the most comfortable airplane for being tall and longer legs. Definitely more comfortable than airline, I can tell you that. I'm 5'10", and economy class on an airline is difficult. Flying the Mooney for many more hours is more comfortable. That I can tell you for sure. Let's try to get some more questions. Terry says, why did you choose a Mooney instead of a Beech, Cessna, or Piper? Great question. There's two reasons. One is kind of my preset long-term bias that I've had, and then the second is that I kind of researched and chose it more thoughtfully. But that first bias, you know, got my mind much more on it. So just like from when I was a child, I admired birds and airplanes. I admired the Mooney M20 ever since what was it 2000 when MS Flight Simulator 2000 came out and they had the Mooney Bravo, and I thought it was the coolest looking airplane. I thought the tail was so beautiful, and it just looked like a sleek airplane, like the way an airplane should be. It was kind of like a jet looking. You know how jets just look really sleek and like they're made to fly. Cessna looks like a flying barn. A beach, you know, looks pretty good, Bonanza or whatnot, but still the legs are kind of bulky, sitting on tall wheels. Cherokees and Arrows, I like them. They feel more sleek to me than a Cessna, and I enjoyed flying them and felt very sleek and fast. But the Mooney just does that even so much more. And when it got time to actually pick an airplane, I realized, you know, I really did look at it kind of everything. I looked at Bonanza, I looked at some Cessnas, the Cardinal, I looked at Piper Arrow and some Pipers as well. And I just felt like nothing but a Mooney would really do it for me. And I think it held me back on buying an airplane a little longer than otherwise. So if I was more willing to get something else, I might have gotten an airplane sooner. But every time I looked at those other airplanes, it just didn't feel like it was the ultimate airplane. Whereas my M20J, it really took me a long time to grow into it, and I still haven't outgrown it. I've been flying it for 10 years, and I've never felt like I outgrew it. Whereas if I got a Cherokee or a Cessna or something like that, I feel like I would have outgrown it and wanted to upgrade to a bigger, you know, a faster, sleeker airplane. And so for those two reasons, I ended up kind of holding out for the airplane of my dreams, and Mooney was it. Um, Oz Mooney Pilot says, "Hey Mike, best wishes from an Aussie Mooney 201 driver. Hey, thanks for joining from down under. Really enjoyed traveling around Australia by airline for my honeymoon. What's the highest you've flown altitude in your Mooney? I think I've only been to only about 14 or 15,000 feet, and that was briefly. Mostly cruising, I've only done 13.5 on oxygen. I think briefly I've been to 14 or 15 just to kind of get over a cloud, you know, or a series of clouds and then get back down at 13. Um, Highest I've been in a GA airplane, though, was about 17,000 feet. I went with a friend in his Beechcraft Bonanza, and this was for kind of a unofficial oxygen checkout. I was borrowing his oxygen system, and I wanted to have practice using it and learn how it works, and wanted to kind of see the effects of hypoxia and learn a little bit more about it before relying on an oxygen system. And we decided he wanted to see how high he can go, and I decided, you know, to see how things are. So what we decided to do is he went on oxygen, starting at 12 or 13,000 feet as required by the FAA. I didn't. Now, you see, passengers are not required to use oxygen. It's only that the pilot is required to provide oxygen to passengers above 15,000 feet. So we had a two-man system, and it was provided, and I elected not to use it. So we went all the way to 17,000 feet in the climb, and I stayed off the oxygen to measure my pulse ox and see if I can see any signs or how things are going. Now, this was only a brief encounter. It only lasted about half an hour. I did not get hypoxic as far as I could tell. I did not have cognition troubles. He tried quizzing me on FARs and rules, and I was able to answer things. And I felt fine. I didn't feel any effects of it. However, my pulse ox was like down to 60 or 65%. So that was pretty interesting. And once we reached 17,000 feet, put the oxygen on, and you know, wanted to see how quickly can you reverse the effects of hypoxia. And like within within a minute, my pulse ox was back up to 100%, and things were fine. And actually, the only hard thing was he decided to do a very rapid descent to 2,000 or 3,000 feet a minute. Not only did that hurt my ears, it hurt my stomach. So in airliners and even in the Mooney, I felt descents that are fast, that, you know, pressure on the ears. But that was the only time I felt pressure on the stomach, and I was kind of surprised that that can happen. It actually hurt in the stomach from descending so rapidly. So that was interesting. Now, one other interesting thing I want to share with you about hypoxia is when I was flying in the vicinity of Denver a few years ago, I think I was at about 13,000 feet, and oxygen is required if you're doing more than for more than 30 minutes. So I was on the oxygen, and I didn't have a second system for my wife, and she was getting a bit of a headache and not feeling too good, so I would let her use it for some brief periods of time, and then take it back, not to be off of oxygen for more than half an hour. And what was interesting was I was fine, my head was okay, but the pulse ox would get a little lower, maybe 85, 90%. But then after being off the oxygen, when she'd give it back to me and I'd put it back on and I breathe for about a minute, the color would come back to my eyes. I was surprised how, like, while you're hypoxic, the colors are dull in your vision. You don't know that. It's just kind of everything looks bland, kind of like desaturated picture or something. You don't know that. You're not aware of it. But then you whiff the oxygen, and suddenly, like within a minute, in 30 seconds, the color backs into your eyes. Everything gets saturated. Everything starts looking good again. That makes you realize, that yeah, your senses are dulled. Your sense of taste is dulled, and your vision starts getting dulled. So yeah, definitely be careful about hypoxia. And having doing some of these tests, trying it out, and finding learning about these things about your body and about yourself can help keep you safer. But I haven't really had the occasion to fly my Mooney higher than 13, 14,000 feet because I haven't really flown over terrain that high, and otherwise the engine's just very inefficient above those altitudes. So let me try to grab a couple more questions here. Let's see. Christopher, I'm 6'2", 215 pounds. Recently flew from, okay. Thanks for the answer, Mike. Wow, absolutely the same with me. I love the Mooney Bravo from FSX. Best of all GA craft that came with it for sure. Yeah. And funny because there are a lot of discussions online about flight simulators. I've pretty much never gone back to flight simulator after flying the real thing. After I got involved in even gliders, let alone airplanes, flight simulator just wouldn't do for me. It just never felt realistic enough, especially the way the controls feel. Like visually, it's pretty good, but it just not the same. Really not the same. And a lot of people ask, is a flight simulator a good tool for flight training and whatnot? And it's a yes and no. I think no. I think the real thing, flying the real airplane, the way it feels, the way you learn to be part of that, and when you have your bacon on the line, it's just very different. I remember crashing in flight simulator a lot. Not a good lesson, not a good valuable lesson. But here's what I want to say: the real value of flight sim, because I've been doing flight sim, yeah, for 7 years. I started with 1998 flight simulator, and I did all the different versions up till 2005 when I started flying gliders. For 7 years, I did a lot of flight sim. Here was the biggest value: doing flight sim before doing real flight training. I was in the mix. I loved it. I read the books. I read the tutorials. I read aviation books. I read private pilot study guides, manuals, just to learn how to fly the flight simulator, but to understand what I'm doing and like look, know what the instruments are, and all of that. So by the time I flew gliders and even airplanes, I already knew what all the instruments are. I knew a lot of the basics. I knew runway directions and alpha phonetics. Well, actually, I knew that from ham radio as well. But being in the environment, and it doesn't really matter that you're doing flight simulator or you're just reading books and watching videos. In that sense, I don't think it matters that much. I didn't feel like flight sim, the hands-on was that accurate, but being in the environment and thinking aviation, breathing aviation, like soaking it in at your own pace and being enthusiastic about it, that enthusiasm and being surrounded by information is super valuable. And that's what I think the biggest value of flight sims is. I think once you get into real flight training and get pretty involved in it, it kind of fades out the interest on that. Let's see here, trying to get some more questions to keep up with all of them. Terry says, great answer, Mike. Mooneys remind me of World War II fighters. Yeah, and that should be no surprise. Go and take a look at the profile picture from the top down of a P-51 Mustang and a Mooney M20. And you're going to see it has the same shape, the same way the wings sweep kind of forward a little bit. They kind of go back first and then sweep forward. The profile is very similar, and I've heard rumors, and there's debate if they're substantiated or not, that Mooney actually bought some of the surplus jigs from P-51, and so there is some P-51 blood in the Mooney, and it was designed shortly after, so that's not surprising. Joan says, do you have gamma injectors while flying lead to peak? Do you fly lower RPM and higher manifold pressure? do the operating manual have settings for over square settings? The whole thing about being square over square is mostly a myth. For a beginner, it's a good to know, like, if you're just going to spontaneously quickly ram the controls, you don't want to be over square, you don't want to overspeed the prop, kind of when you're doing it thoughtlessly, but there's no actual harm or thing that says you can't be over square. The manual for richer peak settings has conditions that would put you over square. The main thing you don't want to do, the thing I was taught while doing complex training, is you go left to right when you slow down, take power out, and right to left when you add power. So when you're gonna, if you want to apply power kind of quickly, I don't know, you are about to fly into a mountain, right? And you need to quickly get power and incline. Red knob in, blue knob in, black knob in. What you don't want to do is throw the black knob in. And that's where, especially if you're rich of peak, you could end up putting in too much manifold pressure, overspeeding the engine, and even possibly detonating, creating detonation if you're pretty lean on the rich of peak side. Lean at peak, you don't want to throw the throttle in because you might stall the engine from flooding it with too much air. If you're lean at peak, putting in that much more air would just lean out the engine excessively and stall it, so you don't want that either. So the thing about not being over squares, don't make abrupt or uneducated changes in power like that. However, consciously doing it, no problem. I do a lot of cruise at 2400 RPM and like 26, 27 inches. Lean at peak provides lots of cooling, especially down low like that, and then bring the mixture out. I don't think about power settings all that much. In the beginning, I kind of, used a lot the POH. I used the tables and charts. I tried to make my own. Lately, I mean, not even lately, for like the last 8-9 years, it's pretty simple. Leave the throttle in full. You want as much air as you can get. Air is at a premium. The higher you get, the less air you have in a normally aspirated engine. RPM, I'll do 27 or 2600 when I'm either very high, about 8,000. You're just not gonna. You need that RPM to make the power. Or if I'm in a hurry, if I want to go fast, I'll keep the RPM maybe 2600. If I'm mid hurry, kind of mid fast speed, I'll do 2500 and and full power. Then I'm just controlling the power with altitude and mixture. And down lower, I might throttle back to 27 inches. If I'm low enough where I can make more than 27 inches, it's going to make more than 75% power. I don't want to do that. I'll bring the throttle back a bit. But for the most part, full throttle, 2500 RPM for efficient engine operation, and then just set the fuel flow with the mixture for the fuel flow I'm going for, generally 8 to 8.5 gallons an hour. Now keep in mind, that's for an M20J and it's for my airplane. Don't necessarily carry that over to other airplanes. Try to keep up with, and I don't have gammy injectors. I just have a good, like homing IO360s tend to have a pretty good gammy spread as it is. Mine's within 0.5. The gammy injectors only promise to get you to about that. So adding gammy injectors wouldn't do much. On a 6-cylinder engine, they were more important, or if you have a very bad gammy spread. Let's see, try to get to all the questions. Is the Mooney factory still supporting the fleet enough for you? Yeah, I haven't. I mean, it's bad in that they have periods where they're kind of down or they're slow and you can't get the parts when you want them. But there's a lot of parts out there. Every time I've had anything going on, it was possible to get them, even when they were shut down. But hopefully the factory can reopen and do a better job and make more airplanes and support the parts. It's a great legacy line of airplanes. Do you have a multi-rating? Nope. I probably have about 10 minutes of multi-time when Brett, who used to fly Mooneys and then got a twin, took me up with him, and I think that's all the multi-time I've got. Do you see an upgrade in aircraft in the future? If so, what? Maybe a twin? No, not really. I'm very, very satisfied with the M20J. Both the speed and performance. I love that airplane. It would take a very, very big jump in airplane to justify it and to satisfy me. Like, going up a couple letters in Mooney probably wouldn't make all that big of a difference to me. And I've been taking a lot of years to get my airplane just the way I want it. And pretty soon I'm gonna get it painted. I did the interior, I did the engine. It's very, very much like my airplane and tailored to me. So I would have to like spend not double, not triple, but probably like 5 or 10 times more. Twin, I have a lot of respect and interest in twins, but at the same time, been doing so much single engine, I don't feel like that is the big issue. The biggest danger to a pilot in an airplane is himself. By far. I've made mistakes. Everyone's made mistakes. The key is to make a mistake that's you can live and learn from, and say, "Wow, I got to be more careful. I can't let myself make such mistakes because, if it's happens again or if it happens that much worse, that won't be the right outcome." And twins, yes, they protect you from engine failure. They may protect you from a few system failures. They don't protect you from the biggest risk. And unless you're a very experienced or professional pilot or a team of pilots, unless you have like a two-man crew or, flying to a higher level of professionalism, us as amateur pilots, we're just as big, if not a bigger threat to ourselves in a twin than we are in a single. It's not the engine failing that's the biggest risk; it's ourselves. That risk does not change in a twin; it actually goes up. More of the accidents in twins tend to be fatal. There's if the accident happens in a twin, they're more likely to be fatal. Engine failures tend to be critical. Engine failures in twins can be fatal. So unless I can be a very, very experienced and professional pilot, I don't feel that I'd be safer necessarily by flying a twin. I don't kid myself that that second engine is the thing that's going to necessarily save me. I really focus much more on myself and proficiency in terms of safety. And I think if I upgraded, I'd probably want a single. But I mean, a twin would be great, but the money, they're not double, they're triple the cost. I've looked at it a couple times, and it's twice the engines, it's triple the cost. The insurance is like triple the cost. The maintenance is like triple the cost. So it's very hard to justify dragging that extra engine around strictly for the peace of mind, unless you got so much money that you can just easily afford it. But I can go faster in a single, and I think my dream plane, if I was to like have like that much more money that I could upgrade to a super fast airplane that I could upgrade to, would probably be a TBM. So that's so far off that there isn't much to change. So I might as well fly my M20J and enjoy it. So let me try to get to more questions so I can kind of catch up to where we're at. Um, Mooney owner from Plymouth, Massachusetts. Peter, thanks for joining. Grant says, is a Mooney a great first airplane for an inexperienced but mature pilot? Now, I don't know if you mean mature in like the sense of aviation mature, or mature just as in terms of being a bit older or maybe more conservative in your personal mindset. And I think in terms of being conservative in personal mindset, it's a good start. I mean, being young and stupid or young and bold with an airplane is dangerous, could be reckless. But just being older and mature, not in aviation, does not necessarily equate to being older and more mature and more conservative in an airplane. You don't know what you don't know. That's something that I've discovered. The more I fly, the more I realize how much I didn't know at previous times, and you don't know what you don't know. That's the biggest danger. And discovering that you don't know what you don't know is, I think, one of the things that makes you an experienced or more experienced pilot. And the only way you discover that is when you discover that you didn't know something you thought you knew. And I think whether you're young or old, you can be at danger for that, and it just takes experience. So I think that it's totally great to get into aviation. That's fine, but you want to be careful not to get yourself into more airplane than you can handle. Not get yourself into situations that you can't handle, things like that. I think a Mooney is a great first airplane. It is my first airplane. I just think you need to take your time and get enough experience in a diversity of airplanes and situations, maybe as a renter or borrowing from a friend or some other circumstance before buying. I got to tell you, here's another thing I want to share. Buying an airplane, having an airplane, owning an airplane has been took as much more learning and new experience as getting a private pilot certificate in the first place. So I felt like getting private pilot in an airplane, or getting an airplane, getting used to everything there's involved in owning and having an airplane, it was like getting a private pilot all over again. It was like that much more learning and experience that I had to gain. The actual process of ownership. And I think I'm lucky in that I waited long enough to get an airplane that I had the flying I was a bit more comfortable on, that when I got the airplane, I could focus on my new private pilot certificate of becoming an airplane owner rather than having to focus on learning to fly and learning to be an owner at the same time. I think it's good to learn to fly, let someone else be the owner, and then when you're already good at flying, then learn to own an airplane, because that's almost like having another rating. And here's the crazy thing is there's no training for it. Nobody teaches you how to be an owner. You get taught how to fly an airplane. You don't get taught how to become an owner. You have to learn that and discover that for yourself. And there's a lot to it. There's a lot of responsibility to it as well, because I mean, when you were flying, renting from a flight school, they checked the logbooks. They check to make sure that all the inspections are done at the right time. They check to make sure that the maintenance is done and that it's done correctly. When you're the owner, it's all on you, and that's a lot to undertake. So I think that it's a two-part question. Should you become an owner, and should it be a Mooney? And I think it's okay to become a Mooney owner and an owner of a first airplane being a Mooney and first ownership being a Mooney. But I think you should have that background experience with flying airplanes first before getting into buying an airplane or buying a Mooney. But if you're going to get into buying an airplane too soon, then maybe it shouldn't be a Mooney. I think that's a better way to put my position on that. Let's see here. Some more questions. I want to get to as much as I can. Yep, I think the P-51 Mooney have the same glide drag ratio. Oh, that's cool. Hey, Mike, on finals, do you tend to stay out of the 1400, 1900 RPM zone per the placard? Find it difficult to maintain outside the zone on short final? I don't think it's placarded. I think it's in the M20J, at least it's a yellow arc. Maybe it says to avoid extended operations. I don't have a hard time with that. I used to as a beginner. I think when I was starting out, I had a hard time. I don't think about it anymore. I don't think I fall there, just because of my routine has become such that I can stay out of the yellow arc and not think about it too much. But I think it has to do just how the way got used to flying it. I basically do on downwind, usually 2200 RPM, 22 inches of manifold pressure. Easy to remember, not really anything. It's just very easy, 22, 22. Usually leaning to about 7 gallons an hour on downwind. Aim for 120 knots on downwind. And then I fly patterns such that I can reduce power and pitch such that my airplane doesn't get into that vibration-y stuff. I don't look at the RPM on final, so I'm not even aware if I'm in the yellow arc or not. But I think I'd know, because it gets very vibration-y, and it's a pretty nasty place to be. So I don't think I'm in it because I don't feel it, but I actually don't pay attention to it anymore. I think I stopped having that problem once I got used to flying the approach at a certain way. And it's hard to put my finger on how exactly I do it, but I just make my power reductions and pitch such that it doesn't get into that anymore. I remember that was definitely a problem I had in the beginning, though. I didn't like that, and I had to learn to fly it so it wouldn't get there. So we're getting close to an hour, so I'm going to try to wrap up. So I'm going to just try to get to all those questions. P-51 laminar flow wing, M20 also. Yeah, I love the laminar flow wing on the Mooney. It took a little bit of getting used to, but it's a great design. If Mooney was no object, what would be your ultimate personal family plane? If money was no object, if Mooney was no object, probably the TBM, the extra seats, the pressurization, the speed, and the Mooney design. Really think that's really cool. What are your thoughts on the Sling 4, the Sling STI? Would you ever build a kit like that? Oh, thanks for telling me it was a kit, because I have no idea what it is, but probably would not do a kit or a experimental airplane. The accident ratio in experimental, and I think particularly home built airplanes, is like 9 times that of type certificated airplanes. Not really my thing. I'd rather stick to the Mooney than to get like a cooler, better, slicker airplane that's experimental or home built. TBM, Roy Lopresti designed the Mooney M301. His design became the TBM. Yep, that you know what? The 301 would have probably been my dream airplane. Like, my family gets bigger, that might have been the airplane I would have went with. Mooney made, I think that was the biggest mistake Mooney ever made, was to sell it to TBM and dump the 301 design, because I think a lot of Mooney pilots would love to upgrade to something like that, just like Bonanza pilots upgrade to a 6-seat Bonanza. How often do you do recurrent training? Like official recurrent training, I just do it as on a need basis. My last BFR was my commercial check ride, so every 2 years, or an instrument proficiency check as needed. But I do a lot of proficiency training on my own. I'll go fly patterns or maneuvers on my own as needed, but I don't really have the time or necessity to fly with an instructor any more than necessary. Mike, can you talk about the safety features inherent to your 201? That's a great question. I'll try to run into that kind of quick. I want to get to the rest of the questions, but I'd say the biggest safety feature of the Mooney M20 is the steel roll cage. Um, it's a really sad sight to see a crashed Mooney, and unfortunately, being friends with the Grim Reaper, you get to see some of that. But the thing that I've seen is the crashed Moonies that I've seen both in person and in pictures. The airplane is crumpled up like a pretzel. The wings are bent over like, you can imagine like in a cartoon where they used to like tie someone up in a pretzel. That's what the airplane looks like. The tail, the wings are bent up into a pretzel. The cabin is in mint condition. The door opens. The cabin isn't bent. The instruments aren't broken. The pilot can open the door and walk out in some of those crash landings. I feel that that is a very strong feature. I think that keeps people safe. When those airplanes do crash in a survivable crash, other airplanes crumple and maybe people get locked and trapped inside. Fire is one of the bigger killers than the actual crash, but the crash might incapacitate someone. The fire can kill them, and being able to have the cabin survive, being able to open the door and get out, can be a lifesaver. Trying to remember some of the others. I mean, there's a bunch. It's got the one piece wing spar. It's got a very, very strong wing. I know that they've been through thunderstorms and crazy conditions, and they've been tested and explored much greater strength than ever known. I don't think there's ever been a Mooney that had a wing break in flight because it's a one piece wing rather than two. There's never been where one wing broke off. And Also, mine in terms of like gear and gadgets, I got a storm scope on mine. I've got second battery backup, electric AI. So I had too many vacuum and AI problems that I got fed up and got a separate backup system. There's probably a bunch more, but I'm trying to get some more questions. I don't have them off the top of my head at this moment. Try to get some more questions. Well said, rented over 16 years, ready to own. Takes time. Ownership of an airplane should be the object of its own live stream. Yeah, Yves, that's a great point. I might talk about that because, like I said, I got training in every airplane I got, in every transition I've had. You get to learn those kind of things, but nobody really teaches you how to own an airplane, and there's a lot to it, and for good and for bad, there's no check ride for it. There's no lesson for it. Like you're not required, except for some basic stuff in your initial private pilot training. There's not a lot that you have to know, but then when you get into it, there is so much that you do need to end up knowing. Being online, being on Mooney Space has been a huge part of that. Having friends in the aviation community, doing our Mooney lunch fly-ins with the guys from the nearby states, and just sharing experiences, being in the group, hearing about it. When somebody else had something break, they share something. When you have that happen later, you know what to do. So being part of a community, both online and in person, has been extremely valuable in being able to learn to understand and keep an airplane. Bill says, I'm from your area. What has been your average operational cost per year? That's hard to say. It varies year by year. The maintenance is the killer thing. In some years it's more, some it's less. Tie downs at Linden are 185. Fuel, that also changes around. Typically probably dropping about 5 to 10 in maintenance a year. But like I said, it varies around the fuel, and when I fly more, fly harder, there's more maintenance. But we're gonna wrap up here. Thanks everyone for taking some time out of your day to join our live stream. I hope that was interesting, beneficial. Normally didn't really spend or waste time on things like this. I'd rather be out flying. I'd rather go fly with friends. I'd rather be doing real aviation. I'd rather go to Oshkosh. I'd rather do these kind of things. But between the pandemic, the snow, the baby, and all these kind of things, been kind of cooped up and just needed to get some aviation in my blood. And that's why I decided to do this live stream. No presentations, no wings courses, no Oshkosh, none of these great things going on. And I think that when we're not flying, we should be thinking about flying. It helps us get proficient more quickly. It gets us back in the pilot seat and helps us remember how to make decisions, remember what we know, keep us thinking about things, keep us on our toes. So watching one of these or participating in one of these is just one other way to do it. When we're done here, leave a comment. Let me know what you guys thought of this. Should I do this again? Or are there topics you'd like me to talk about another time? Maybe I'll do this again if there's enough interest. Also, you can check out all my Mooney to a Wonder videos dating back over 10 years of owning a Mooney, and even before that, flying some of the gliders and airplanes I rented, sharing all those aviation flying adventures and information with you. So thanks for watching and joining in. You can leave your name for a Wings credit. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not. There's no Wings credit, but you get a honorary Wings credit for participating in the discussion, just from being involved in aviation, thinking about it, and becoming a better, more informed pilot. So thanks so much for joining. I'm going to sign out now. Wish you all have a wonderful Valentine's Day presidential weekend, and stay safe, fly safe. Take care now. Bye.